What's your no one will ever believe this true story?
My weirdest true story that's most likely not paranormal. Waiting for a city bus one day, near an intersection. Perfectly normal day. Normal-looking car drives past. As it approaches the traffic light, I notice there's a murder of around 30 crows flying behind the car, like one car length up in the air and one length behind. Car turns left at the traffic light. The crows turn left and follow it. Weirdest fucking thing, and I couldn't get my phone out in time to take a video. It's like if the crows were balloons on a 15-foot string, that's how tightly they were following that car. And it drives me crazy because I will never know what happened. Did the driver kill a crow? Was the driver a witch? What happened when the driver got out of the car wherever they were going?
I was camping in the Appalachian Mountains with three of my guy friends. We were all laughing and telling stories around the fire one night around midnight. The friend next to me grabbed my leg and pointed at the woods. We both saw a man's silhouette standing there. We called out to him, but he turned around and vanished from sight. We were 18, no cell service, and camp was all pitched up at midnight. Too late to search for another spot where we might get away from whoever it was, and too scared to search for him. We decided to sleep through the night there with two-man watch teams. No signs of him for the rest of the night. We got out of the woods, all right. 2 days later, two hikers were stabbed and killed by a mentally disturbed man who'd encountered them on a trail near where we were camping. Every now and then I wonder how close we came to having our cards punched that night by what could have been a knife-wielding murderer.
Sweet older lady in our church was a retired nurse. Never married, no kids, she had a heart attack, and while she was in the hospital, her niece and nephew came and took her stuff. She had a modest apartment, but she had some very nice crystal and silver, and some lovely furniture. When she came home, she had no dishes and almost no furniture. Several years later, she passed away. Her most recent will, dated after her heart attack, left $1 each to her niece and nephew. Everything else went to the church. Her estate was $9 million.
You ever hear about Randall Lee Smith? Back in 1981, he murdered two social workers hiking up along the Appalachian Trail. He was caught, convicted, served 15 years in prison for the murders. He was paroled, released. In 2008, two men camping in Dismal Creek, Virginia had a man come out of the woods and talk to them while they were fishing. The guy was a bit odd, an old man in brand new poorly fitting gear. He sorta invited himself to dinner. While sitting around the campfire, the old man pulled out a pistol and shot one in the head and fired after the other guy. The pistol was a .22 and the shot to the guy's head was deflected. He was shot in the head but was still alive and charged the guy and tried to wrestle the gun away. His buddy who ran was shot in the back but wasn't aware of it as he jumped in the Jeep and started it up. When he heard his friend start the Jeep, the guy who, I will remind you, was shot in the head, ran for the Jeep, not wanting to be left behind. Both shot and losing blood, they tore ass down the mountain. The old man, however, took the truck they left behind and started chasing them. They made it down the mountain and got to a farmhouse and banged on the door begging for help. The police were called and the two would-be victims were airlifted to the hospital and survived. The cops went up the mountain and found the old man in the pickup that had overturned during the chase. He was hurt from the crash. They arrested him and got him taken to a secure hospital, where he was identified as Randall Lee Smith. The attack happened less than a mile from his previous murder site. In his pockets were personal effects, glasses, keys, and other things whose owners have never been identified, but they were not of a prescription or style likely to belong to an old man. Randall Lee Smith died of his injuries from the crash 4 days after being caught. The two men who would have been his victims survived.
I was almost abducted, went to a park when I was like 6 with my sister and my mom, and there was really nice man who helped me up when I didn't quite stick the landing at the end of the slide. My mom noticed him and figured he was just being polite. Well, my sister runs off to my mom for a minute, so I'm alone. I look up and see the man looking at me and walk around the play area behind the slides and by the pond away from view of the parents. I was curious, so I followed. He was crouched by the pond out of sight, and I remember tidbits, but I do remember he told me I was pretty and very mature for my age. He then was in the middle of asking me if I was only here with my sister when my mom emerges absolutely terrified and in a state of panic. Never seen her like that to this day, and I think that's partly why it was seared into my memory. The man ran when she started yelling, "What the fuck do you think you're doing?" I started sobbing because my mom was yelling. She never yells, but it took me a few years to fully understand what happened and what could have happened. I did have the stranger danger talk, but I just thought the man was so nice. That's all I really remember from that day. I'm 99% sure my mom reported what happened to the police, but no idea what happened after.
When I was 12, I was walking to school, and behind me there was a priest who seemed to be walking with a kid a few years younger than me. He dropped the kid off at my school and started hacking at a toonie, Canadian $2 coin, that was stuck in the ice. I wasn't allowed to go inside yet since I was a few minutes early, so I just looked at the toonie and wondered if he'd get it out. Then he looked up at me, made a joke about how I was never going to get it, and then he walked up to me, punched me in the gut, and then left. I was wearing a winter coat so it didn't hurt that much, but it was still pretty creepy. Nobody at school believed me. Then I saw him walking by my house like every day or so. And I live across the street from a school, so I was worried about the other kids and told my brother who went to that school. He came over and then I pointed the priest out to him. He was sitting on my lawn, and he said that he was one of the priests that worked at his school. I never once saw him actually enter the building. He mostly just walked around it for hours eating chips. They were mainly potato chips, but sometimes they were ketchup chips. I'm not talking about fries.
I was 6 or 7 years old, and for weeks I'd been feeling uneasy when playing outside, walking to school or friends' houses. Going to bed felt wrong. It was winter, and there was snow on the ground. I couldn't sleep. This wasn't new. I've always been a light and infrequent sleeper. That night, for some reason, I was compelled to get up and turn on my bedroom light so I could read. After I turned the light on, I grabbed a book and went to my window bench to settle in, and staring at me was two men's faces. To this day I could describe them to a police sketch artist. I ran to get my parents, and when they came in, obviously the men were gone. My parents didn't believe me, so I went back to bed, and didn't sleep at all. The next day when I went outside to walk to school, you could see two sets of footprints going to and from my window, and tire tracks in our yard.